Welcome to the Spring 2020 Law Roundtable, Zoom virtual style. This is a combination of two events that were supposed to take place this semester. We were supposed to have some of our panelists join us on campus for a discussion, and there were going to be a group of students who were going to be heading to Raleigh to meet in person with other members of our panelists. Members of our panel, and for obvious reasons that did not happen. So we are making the best of the situation, and we're excited that you guys decided to join us. My name is Kelly Robinson. I'm the pre-law advisor and assistant director in the office, and I am joined by my coworker, Josh King. He's the assistant director for athlete career development. We first want to say that our thoughts are with everybody, panelists and students who may have friends or family who are being impacted by this current situation. Know that our thoughts are with you and sending positive thoughts your way as we're navigating these times. What we'd like to do, though, is spend this next hour and potentially two, if you're joining us for the second part of the segment, talking about the field of law in government and beyond. I'd like to take an opportunity for our panelists each to introduce themselves. If you could, please, introduce yourself and say what it was that you studied at Davidson, and quickly your current role and the law school that you attended after Davidson.
My name is Shreve Ariail. I undergraduated at Davidson class of '98 with Jackie Kasulis, who's on here today as well. I was a political science major. Also spent a lot of time taking history classes, and went to the University of Virginia Law School, graduated in 2002. And for 10 years, I was an AUSA in the Eastern District of New York, working alongside Jackie. And I'm currently the Deputy General Counsel for Litigation and Investigations at the Central Intelligence Agency.
My name is Lisa Branch. I am a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. I used to be a judge on the Georgia Court of Appeals. I graduated from Davidson in 1990. I was an English major. And then after I took a year off, I went to Emory Law School in Atlanta, graduated in 1994. Generally speaking, I was in private practice at one law firm for most of my career in Atlanta. But other than the two judgeships I just mentioned, I also served in the Bush administration and worked at the Department of Homeland Security and the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs at the U.S. Office of Management and Budget. And I also clerked for a federal judge. So I had a whole host of stints in the state and federal government in addition to a private practice career.
And I'm Sam Ervin IV, or Jimmy Ervin. I'm the old person on the panel. I graduated from Davidson in 1978, went to Harvard Law School after that, then practiced law privately in the little town that I live in now, Morganton, in the western end of North Carolina, then served for almost 10 years on the North Carolina Utilities Commission, then served 6 years on the North Carolina Court of Appeals, and have been an Associate Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court since January 1 of 2015.
I'm Brian Fork. I'm a 2001 Davidson graduate. I was a political science major at Davidson. Like Shreve, almost took enough history classes to get a major there too, didn't quite make it. I worked at Davidson, coached football for a year, and then went to law school at University of North Carolina and practiced law at two different large law firms here in Raleigh, doing business litigation for about 13 years. And then for the last 2 years, I've been the General Counsel for the North Carolina Senate, reporting to the President Pro Tem of the State Senate.
And my name is Jackie Kasulis. I'm a 1998 Davidson graduate with Shreve. I was a history major. I took a lot of anthropology classes, so I was almost able to do that major as well. I studied abroad. I did the Davidson Semester in India program. I graduated and did a 2-year stint at a startup telecommunications company, and then went to Columbia Law and graduated from at Columbia in 2003. I worked at a big law firm in New York City for 4 years, and then I joined the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of New York in January of 2008, and I have been there ever since, and I am currently the chief of the criminal division.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate that. The first question that I'd like to pose to all of our panelists, kind of a three-part question, if you may. How did you determine you wanted to pursue a career in law? Was it always an interest? Was there an aha moment? Did your interest evolve over time? If you could walk through, how that occurred, we appreciate it. And again, whoever would like to start, feel free.
I mean, I'll go ahead and start. I was born into the legal profession. I'm a fourth generation lawyer. My great grandfather, grandfather, and father all practiced law in Morganton. My great grandfather never held public office, but everybody else in the family has. So I grew up in a legal family. I knew what I was getting into when I decided to go into law. I never really had the moment of the aha moment. It was something I thought about for a long time, gave some thought to other options, but finally decided that the law was something that I wanted to do, and essentially joined the family business. So it's something that I've just been involved in all my life.
And I would say that the same is true for me. My grandfather, Harley Branch, went to Davidson College, as did a whole host of my relatives, but my grandfather was a lawyer. And if a little girl can ever be just like a grandfather, that was me. And I really sort of followed in his footsteps throughout my life, and really knew probably in ninth grade that I wanted to be a lawyer. I knew when I came to Davidson that I was going to go on to law school.
So I can go. I actually had a really different experience. I don't come from a family of lawyers. And I actually remember saying when I was at Davidson that I didn't want to be a lawyer. I was pre-med for a long time and then decided that wasn't for me. Graduated and went to that startup company where I actually got exposed to a lot of law just through the nature of the work I was doing, and found it interesting. My boyfriend at the time was applying to business school, and I said I wanted to go to grad school, but I didn't want to go to business school. And he said to me, have you ever thought about law school, because you like arguing with me, and so it's something that I think perhaps you may be good at. So, I looked into it. I took a practice LSAT, and, I applied to a bunch of law schools, and ultimately ended up at Columbia, and, have really enjoyed it. But I really had little familiarity with the practice of law before I embarked on my legal career. So I have a little bit of a different background than everyone else.
I was always somewhat interested in law or government or politics going through high school. I hadn't really thought about law school, but it's also sort of the back of your mind when you're interested in the kind of stuff that led me to majoring in political science. But when I got to Davidson, I was recommended to take a course that Professor Thornberry taught called Constitutional Law. And everybody said, if you like this course, then you probably like law school. And it was my favorite course that I took the whole time I was in college. And it was really taught just like a constitutional law class was taught in law school. We read cases, we talked about cases and what they stood for and what they meant. And that was sort of something that told me, well, I might enjoy law school. I also, Davidson related, participated in the Davidson and Washington summer program, which was about 20 students that went up to DC for the summer. You did any kind of government-related internship during the day, and then in the evening, 2 days a week, you took a class taught by a Davidson professor. And I just had kind of a low-level internship with a U.S. senator, but observing all the people that worked in the Senate office and worked at the Foreign Relations Committee, they all did different things. All the things that they did I thought were really cool and interesting. And the only thing that all those people had in common was they had a law degree. So I thought, well, I'll go get a law degree and then I'll come up with something cool to do like they're doing.
I sort of came at this from two different angles. I'm guilty of being a child of a lawyer and a grandson of a lawyer, and half my family is lawyers. My uncle was a prosecutor for a number of years. My dad was a assistant Commonwealth's attorney in Virginia, and went into private practice after that. So law definitely ran in the blood, but I didn't actually really have an appreciation of what kind of what I would do with a law degree. And I had a really strong interest in history and political science and foreign affairs at Davidson, and had a lot of great experiences with some of my professors there. Ken Mankaus, I did the Davidson and Washington program as well, and so somewhere after college, I got an opportunity to go and intern in South Carolina at the solicitor's office in Charleston, and that really solidified my interest in being a prosecutor. And when I started looking into being a federal prosecutor, I recognized that there were some offices in the country that were doing some really neat work, and that in the counterterrorism space. And so ED&Y, where Jackie works now, and the Southern District of New York and the Eastern District of Virginia were the three offices that I was very interested in working at. And then ultimately, while in law school, 9/11 happened, and so that really solidified my interest in being a federal prosecutor and doing national security work. And so that's really how I ended up where I am.
Wonderful, thank you. My next question for our group is, how do you believe Davidson prepared you for law school and or the field of law?
I can jump back in real quick. I can tell you when I got to UVA, the amount of writing that I had done at Davidson really prepared me in a way that I think a lot of folks at the law school were not prepared. And even from such august institutions as Harvard, I think people struggle with the writing requirements. No knock, Jimmy, I promise. But the amount of writing that you had to do at Davidson was really critical, I think, in terms of success, and just generally the rigor of the work at Davidson and the expectations. That was a huge piece of it. And then I say the third piece would be, in the field of law, you're often put in very complex, difficult situations where you have to make hard calls, judgment calls that are, I think require some backbones, some moral compass. And I think Davidson did a great job prepping me for that.
And to piggyback a little bit on what Shreve had said, I, especially having been an English major at Davidson, and the things that I learned at Davidson were certainly how to write and how to analyze. And those two skills were invaluable in law school. I'll never forget taking a tax course in law school, and I'd had no exposure to tax in any way at Davidson. And so it was a little frightening when there were a lot of accountants who were in the class with me. And I kept thinking, I don't understand how I'm going to be able to hold my own in this class. And what was interesting is I think I ended up with like the second highest grade in that class, because I just sort of had to rely on all the skills that I had from Davidson, and the people who were accountants thought they didn't have to study. So those two things combined certainly contributed to doing well. But I think it really cannot underscore enough the writing skills that you learn at Davidson. They carry you through so many different careers, and they're just invaluable in the legal profession. But also just Davidson teaches you how to learn. And I'm not sure that all schools, all colleges or universities teach you that. And that skill set is great both in law school and then in the legal profession after that.
And to follow up on that, I mean, I don't know that I belonged at Harvard, Shreve, but I got in somehow. When I got there, there had not been a Davidson graduate admitted to Harvard Law School in several years. The school has gotten a lot better since I left. I'm sure I probably couldn't get in now. But when I got there, I was pretty intimidated by the group of people I met. I remember the first or second day, I was in a 160 some odd person section in criminal law or contracts or something, and turned to the person next to me and introduced myself. And he had just graduated from MIT with a degree in nuclear physics, and I felt pretty inadequate compared to that. But I learned very quickly that the analytical skills that I had learned at Davidson, everybody's alluded to the written work requirement, writing, as much writing as Davidson required. I was a history major. I think I forgot to answer that part of the first question, but I was a history major. And the other thing that I think that I got out of Davidson that I think was really valuable to me both at the time and has been later is a sense that Davidson teaches you, or at least taught me, the interconnectedness of all people, the value of all people, and it led to an understanding of some of the deeper issues that you find in dealing with law across the board. And so I had the same experience Lisa did. I took courses about stuff I absolutely knew nothing about and did okay. And I think a lot of it was just I was used to working hard. I was used to writing, and I had been exposed to an environment in which I had been led to believe if I tried hard enough, I could succeed.
I think you'll start to notice a pattern here in our answers. I think the thing that I learned the most from Davidson that helped me the most in law school and then on into my legal career was how to write. And I just remember so many afternoons taking exams, sitting up in chambers with one of those blue books, just writing in the book for 3 hours, filling in answers and analyzing problems and figuring out what to put down and learning how to write, learning how to get your thoughts down on paper over and over and over again in so many different classes. And that's really what law school is you go and you sit there and you take a class for a semester and listen to a professor teach for 3 months and you read a million cases. And then you sit down for 3 hours and you write 3 or 4 essay answers, and that's your grade for the class. And I'll say this because we're all Davidson people here. I remember after my first semester of law school, there was probably 6 or 7 Davidson alums in my class. And when we got our grades, we all kind of looked around and looked at each other and figured out that we had all done really, really well. And that probably had something to do with where we went to undergrad and how we learned how to work and learned how to write and learned how to get our ideas down on paper and translate what need to be come across in our work.
Yeah, and just from my experience, I think the writing, but also just the management of the workload, it wasn't foreign to me when I went to Columbia that I was going to have to work hard and put in a lot of hours, and that was sort of a muscle memory that I had that I had developed at Davidson. I had a similar experience to Jimmy in some senses where when I first got to Columbia, I sort of looked around and was initially a little intimidated, and then as the classes got going, I realized, I've been trained for this. I'm very well trained for this because I had such a rigorous undergraduate experience. And I think the second thing that Davidson taught me, and I mentioned earlier that I had done the semester in India program, which was a Davidson program, and that was such a formative experience for me. I think that a lot of the choices that I have made later in my life has a lot to do with having done that program and building the confidence in myself to push myself outside of my comfort zone, try something that I didn't have a lot of familiarity with, and know that I could succeed in doing that because that confidence had been built in me through the experience of being at Davidson and doing that program. So I think it prepared me well academically, but it also prepared me really well as a person to be successful, in this new experience for me.
Great, thank you, everybody. I appreciate that. So writing is key. I'm hearing a lot of the writing aspect, definitely. So along with the other skills. This third question I wanted to ask, I know some of you alluded to in your introductions, but just to kind of ask is, did you work in private practice before transitioning to your area now? Why did you pivot your legal career path, and how did private practice work prepare you? Or if you didn't work in private practice, how did your previous work experience prepare you for what you are doing now?
So I can start. I mean, I worked in a big law firm for 4 years after I graduated. My first summer of law school, I worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Tampa, Florida, the area that I grew up in, and I completely fell in love with the idea of being a federal prosecutor. It was such a formative experience for me. But I was, paying for law school by myself. I took out all these student loans, and I knew I couldn't financially go directly to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I was like Shreve. I looked at offices that I would be interested in. ED&Y was obviously one of them, but very rarely do those offices accept graduates right out of law school. And so both from a financial perspective and an experience perspective, it was important for me to do something else first. And so I went to a big law firm for 4 years. I worked in litigation. I actually had a really positive experience in the law firm that I worked at. I know that's not typical, but I really can't plug enough. My law firm was really focused on developing trial skills, which I knew were going to be really important for hopefully my next step in my legal career. And so I did that law firm for 4 years. I worked really hard. I learned a ton from very experienced litigators, many of whom were former prosecutors. So that was really formative for me. And once I paid down the law school debt, I was in a position to then, both from an experience and a financial perspective, to then apply to various U.S. attorneys' offices. And I was lucky enough to ultimately be hired by ED&Y, and that's where I've been ever since.
And just to follow on Jackie's career path, after I clerked, I did the same thing. I ended up going to Skadden Arps. I actually tried very hard to go into public service, and it wasn't ready for me. But to me, ultimately, I sort of saw the private sector opportunity as a means to an end at the time. I didn't realize how much training and experience though I would get there, and the networks, frankly, that I developed there were key for me getting into the U.S. Attorney's Office. Ultimately, the partners that I worked for all were former assistants in the Southern District and the Eastern District, and just the work that and experiences that you have in private practice. Frankly, the writing and the sort of emphasis on writing, particularly big firm practice, that was pretty significant for me in terms of making a compelling case to go to the government. But for me, it really was like Jackie, paying off some bills, figuring out how to live in New York, which is where I was, and getting there. I mean, at some point, I'm going to have to probably transition back to the private sector so I can make sure my kids have all the same opportunities I did. But for me, that was the means to the end.
And I went to private practice really for two reasons. First of all, it alluded to some of my family background earlier. I had always wanted to go into public service at some point, but I come out of a family where my grandfather was a United States Senator, was a state Supreme Court justice, a trial judge, and a state legislator. My father was a state legislator, was a state trial judge, and then wound up to the end of his career as the chief judge of the Fourth Circuit. I was a little bit concerned about being perceived as pushy if I tried to get into public service first, because, he's just another name. And so I wanted to get in. I wanted to demonstrate I could actually do something in the private sector before trying to move into public service. Another reason that I did it, and it's proven to be valuable, is that it gave me, I was in a small general practice firm. We did a lot of trial work, but we also wrote contracts for people, represented small businesses. I've written wills for people. We did lots of different things. And so if about half of us have been involved in the state system and about half of us have been involved in the federal system. The state system is really in many ways the bread and butter of the court system in the country. It's somewhere north of 90% of the cases that are decided in the court systems in this country are decided in the state courts. And I've always been a state court lawyer. And so being in private practice prepared me to do the kinds of bread and butter cases that we still do at the Supreme Court of North Carolina. So I always wanted to go into public service. It was something that I had planned to do all my life, but I felt like I needed some preparation both personally and professionally before I could go, and waited about 18 years before I was able to do it. And eventually wound up having, in North Carolina, judges are elected. So I've had to run, I got to my current position by being elected. I expect Lisa got elected to the Georgia Court of Appeals too. It's a similar system down there. And so we wind up having to be kind of full-time judges and part-time politicians. And frankly, being in a small town helps with that too.
Yeah, I too spent about a little over 12 years in private practice. I do confess to, when I was in law school, starting to entertain the idea that I was interested in being a judge. But how you get from law school to being a judge is so very, very different, and there's not a set path. And so, not really understanding how to do that, I set myself on a path in private practice. I joined a law firm in Atlanta. At the time, it would have been considered a large law firm, but since King and Spalding and Alston and Bird have grown so large since then, it's probably a medium to large firm now. And I was in commercial litigation doing business disputes, and really was content to do that my entire life. I was at the same firm as a summer law clerk, as an associate, and then as a partner, and was terribly happy there. And I was sort of the person who found government service accidentally. Even my judicial clerkship after law school, I wasn't focused on that. I thought I would go to work at this law firm, and the dean pulled me aside and said, I think you need to do a federal judicial clerkship. And then I went back to the firm, and I had a friend persuade me that I needed to throw my hat into the ring to go up to DC to join the Bush administration. So I did that, and I came back to the same law firm, and that same friend said, yeah, there's some positions vacant on the Court of Appeals of Georgia. The governor gets to appoint, and then you have to be elected. I think you need to throw your hat into the ring for that. So I did that and thought I was going to be a state Court of Appeals judge forever. And then I got a call about this job. And so here I am. But private practice was such a big part of who I am and how my career advanced. And the law firm that I was fortunate to spend so many years with really taught me so much of how to be a lawyer. And I'm forever grateful that they kept taking me back. So
my third year of law school, I worked 2 days a week full time at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of North Carolina, and loved it, and really thought that's where I wanted to head. I applied for judicial clerkships thinking I was going to do that. Had a couple other federal justice opportunities, sort of 1 year stint internships out of law school. But I also did a summer job with a big law firm in Raleigh and really enjoyed it, and just kind of did that on a lark, a good way to make a fair amount of money for a law student in the summertime. Didn't really know what I was getting into, but I liked the people at the firm that I worked with a lot and liked the cases that I was introduced to. And sort of debated what to do after I graduated, decided I would go try out the law firm for a while. A lot like what Judge Branch said, I just kind of got into it and enjoyed it and kept doing it. And I practiced at one international firm for about 10 years, was a partner there, joined another old, large North Carolina firm, practiced there for about 3 years. My practice was mostly business litigation. There was a fair amount of restructuring work and bankruptcy work, but it was all commercial dispute resolution work. And I learned a ton from it, from writing and briefing and learning how to go stand up in front of all different types of judges, how to deal with clients, how to negotiate complicated situations, put pieces together, put deals together, pull them apart. And those skills have really helped me a lot in the job that I have now. But like Judge Branch, I always had the itch that I'd like to go back into government service in some way, but I didn't know what that would look like. I didn't know when it would be. I had no plan to get there. I wasn't really trying to get there. I enjoyed what I was doing. And about 4 or 5 years ago, the North Carolina General Assembly and the governor got into a dispute about who had the constitutional authority under the state constitution to appoint certain members to boards and commissions. And the governor sued the General Assembly, and because it was a sort of an intra-government dispute, they hired an outside law firm out of Charlotte. I ended up getting hired by the General Assembly to defend them in the lawsuit. And the last of the case, pure separation of powers dispute that we took all the way through the trial court, got to go up to the state Supreme Court where Justice Ervin works and argue cases that were 200 years old about the original meaning of the state constitution. And it was, if you're a law or history or politics dork, it was about as fun as you could have. But that's sort of a one-shot thing. Maybe another one comes around in private practice over the years. But I did a couple really small things for the General Assembly after that when they needed outside counsel. And then about 2 years ago, I was actually leaving the largest trial that I'd ever worked on, a 2-week case in the business court in Greensboro, North Carolina, with this really, really large dollar case for what I do and represent or involving the largest public utility in the state. And I got a call on the way home from Senator Berger, who's the president of the North Carolina Senate, saying that, hey, we've got this, the general counsel position's come open, we're interested in it. I thought about it for a while. And it turns out several people at my current firm had taken stints leaving the law firm to go for 2 or 4 years to work for prior governors. One had gone to work at the U.S. Attorney's Office and come back. And I went to my firm and said, hey, if I've got this opportunity, if I go do it for a few years, can I come back? And they said, sure, that had worked out and helped the practice of several other people at the firm. So I'm about 2 years in. I may do it for another 2 years. It's probably not the type of job that I can keep forever. Whether I go back to private practice or not, I'm not sure. I'm having a whole lot of fun doing what I'm doing right now, but that's kind of how I accidentally ended up where I am now, working for the state government.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm seeing students are posting questions in the chat, so we appreciate that. Just as a reminder to everybody else that if you've got questions that that you'd like to have asked in the Q&A that's coming up shortly, just go ahead and keep posting those in the chat, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. My next question for the panelists, I'm kind of combining 2 questions. What your current role right now, what would you say is the most rewarding part of your job? And then also, what is the most challenging aspect of your roles?
I'll go ahead. One of the things, I would say this is the most rewarding, but this is one of the most marketable pieces of information I think people should take away if they want to go be a lawyer at the CIA, is you don't have your phone with you all day long. And so when you're in meetings and you're interacting with human beings, you're not looking at your text messages, or you're not seeing the Chiron on the banner. So that's actually a really lovely thing. And then when you leave at the end of the day, the emails stop because it's all classified and you can't get emailed at home. And when you're on vacation, nobody bothers you. So that's a pretty awesome thing, especially if you have small children and family to worry about. My wife appreciates that a lot. That's not the most rewarding thing about my job, though. I'd say it's the people really that I work with, and the same is true as at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Everybody who goes to work at the CIA for the most part, I would say, and certainly at the U.S. Attorney's Office, it's very mission oriented. Folks are really dedicated to doing the right thing, and very patriotic set of folks that put a lot of their life on the table to do the great things that they do. So that's a lot of fun. The most challenging thing, I'd say, at least in my current job, is the government is very parochial in many respects, and individual agencies have their own interests, and groups have their own interests, and it's really hard to make sure that everyone is looking at the bigger picture when they're focusing on a really complex issue. So that's the challenge I have, and that's internal at the agency, above me, below me, and external, with the stakeholders around the federal government that we deal with. That's really hard, and corralling people to do the right thing despite their parochial interests is really difficult. So.
I would say my favorite part of my job, because I was an English major and I do like writing and have always enjoyed it throughout my entire career. I mean, honestly, getting the opinions out, writing the opinions. Right before I came onto this video conference, we were working on 2 sentences and just couldn't get them right. And they finally came together exactly as I needed them to. And then I was able to push that opinion into circulation, just so that everybody knows. We sit in panels, generally speaking, of 3 judges. And so I put this opinion into circulation to the other 2 panel members. And we got, I got 2 other opinions published today that I was sitting on different panels with. And there's just something so satisfying about struggling with the language and getting it to do exactly what you want it to do, and then putting that opinion out, and feeling like, because at the end of the day, all we're trying to do is get the law right. And when you finally have hit upon the right way to express it, there's something so satisfying about that. But also, I would say the most satisfying thing for me, I have term law clerks that work for me for a year at a time. And I'm about halfway through a term with this current group of clerks. And so every year I have 4 new law clerks, and just having that opportunity to teach them what I can to help them grow, and as they sort of jump off into their legal careers, just as the federal judge I clerked for did the same for me, and to serve in that mentor role is certainly just doing what Judge Forrester taught me to do. The hardest part about my job is probably what you hear for judges. This was not a problem for me on the State Court of Appeals, which was actually quite social, and we were always with the other judges and with a lot of lawyers all the time. But being a federal judge, it is very isolating. I work in a building in Atlanta where I sometimes don't see another judge for a month if I didn't make an effort to do so. I see my clerks and my assistant, but really the building is kind of a mausoleum. It's a gorgeous old building, but it's very quiet and you just don't see anybody. It's serving us well during this period of the pandemic, because we're still open and operating. We can work from home if we want to, but there is an isolating part of being a federal judge that's hard for me.
I can go. I mean, I would say the rewarding part about my job, to underscore what Shreve was saying, is, you know, I get to work with a really sort of smart, motivated group of people who really chose to do this work, and they decided to forego a lot of other opportunities that they had. And we get to talk every day about doing the right thing, and making sure that we're protecting our community, that we're vindicating victims' rights. And for me, it's incredibly motivating and meaningful. And so, you know, when I first joined the U.S. Attorney's Office, it's a 3-year commitment. I thought I was going to do my 3 years and move on and do something else. And here I am 12 years later. I'm really like one of those old timers in my office.
She's the last one standing of our crew.
I am the last one standing. Did you call that? I didn't. But yeah, and then I also think, you know, we're trial lawyers, and so we get to go and try cases and give jury addresses, and our case is our own. We are start to finish, soup to nuts, and there's something about that you know, I just really enjoy, that we get to play that role and get to stand up and say that we're represent the people of the United States. It's something that is so meaningful to me, and is something that you know, I value. And so 12 years later, here I am. So obviously I find it very rewarding. I think the hard part is a little bit on what Shreve touched on, which is that everyone always thinks that the government has unlimited resources, and we don't. And so oftentimes we are in a little bit, I did white collar work before I became chief of the criminal division, and we had some David and Goliath situations where we were prosecuting big white collar cases against these big unlimited resource law firms. And so there'd be 3 prosecutors and an agent, and no fooling 15 attorneys from a law firm, you know, on the other side of the courtroom. And so that can be really challenging. And then obviously the decisions that we make have a tremendous impact on people's lives. And that can be stressful. You know, it's obviously something burden that we take on, and we think a lot about and make sure that we're what we believe is making the right decisions, but they are the kinds of decisions that can keep you up at night. And so, you know, that can be a challenge of the work that we do.
I mean, I guess the most rewarding thing about my job is just the opportunity to work with my colleagues there. I've been there almost 6 years now. We've changed some in membership since I got there in 2015. But it's a very bright, smart, diverse group of people. And it's very rare that when we sit down to decide cases that one or more of my colleagues see things about a particular case that I just never saw. And hopefully occasionally I have the same kind of effect in reverse, that I see things that they don't see. But just the sheer intellectual engagement that's the part of appellate judicial work is really appealing to me. There's 7 of us. We decide all cases with all 7 of us, unless one of us has to be disqualified for some reason. And that's the most rewarding. The most challenging part is something that I've already alluded to, which is the fact that we are elected. And so periodically we have to leave our mausoleum. At least my grandfather was almost, when he described the Supreme Court, decided to describe it using that very same word. So I've heard it before. We have to leave our mausoleum and go out and spend, in a hotly contested political state like North Carolina, we have to spend close to 2 years running for re-election and trying to do a demanding full-time job, coupled with trying to be a political candidate, raising money, persuading people that they ought to vote for us. That makes for a difficult couple of years. I've run statewide in North Carolina 3 times now, and it's I have met people who contend that they enjoy being political candidates. I am not one of them, and so that's clearly, to me, the most challenging part of the job. Is just what you have to do to get there and keep it on the case.
I think the most rewarding part of the job for me is providing advice to the senators that I work for. I've got a lot of respect for particularly the leadership group, the president of the Senate, the majority leader, a couple of the other committee heads that I do a lot of my work for. And when they present some problem that they don't know how to solve, and some issue facing the state that they want to get to the bottom of, but our legislature is a volunteer legislature. Each of the legislators makes a little over $13,000 a year. Most of them all have other jobs and go to other parts of the state, and they really rely on us to figure out what the problem is, make recommendations, go through the law, and get them a solution that works. And at the General Assembly, we've got about 80 lawyers on a nonpartisan sort of career central staff, and they're the experts. They're really good at what they do. They're really smart. They know transportation, education, justice, whatever their area is, in and out. And so I'm presented with a problem. I get to go work with all these other smart lawyers and say, what are the options here? How does this work? It's all stuff that I don't know anything about. Nice thing about being the general counsel, you're very general and you're just kind of all over the place and you don't have to know anything about anything. But I get other people to tell me avenues, and then I get to distill them and try to come up with some sort of plan that can work. Go to the senators and say, look, there's some risks out here, and these are risks that we need to take into account, and these are some risks out here that we probably need to move forward with if you want to get your policy piece across. So I really love getting to the bottom of a problem and then going and sitting in front of these people that have been elected and say, guys, here's a way to do this. Here's a way to solve the problem. And then it's fun when they move forward with what you recommend that they do.
Great. So I believe we're going to move on to the student questions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to post those on the screen so everyone can see it. If we have about 10, 12 minutes left for Q&A, for you students, we had a lot of great questions. I'm going to put the ones that I believe are the most specific to these folks up here. Keep in mind, we have a networking session, so there's a lot of questions you can ask regarding law school and other things. But if we could have just one of you guys answer each question, I picked 3 that I believe we can get through in the next 10, 12 minutes, and that'll be great. So I'm going to go ahead and share that as we speak. And whoever wants to take that, go for it.
Well, I don't know that this is an ethical issue so much as it's what is your commitment to the rule of law. Anybody that serves in the judicial capacity winds up having to interpret laws to mean things that they pretty clearly mean that you might not have passed yourself if you'd been in the legislature. I mean, part of our job, particularly in statutory construction cases, is to find out what Brian's bosses meant when they pass particular pieces of legislation, and you have to make a good faith effort to understand what they meant and to try to apply it, whether you agree with it or not. And so I don't know anybody, Lisa, I'm sure would agree with me, I don't know any trial or appellate court judge that has not enforced a legal principle or interpreted in a statute in a way that doesn't suit our own policy preferences. But you have to do that. I mean, that's what a commitment to the rule of law means. And so I've done that many times. I'm sure Lisa has as well. And I think it's just something that comes with the territory at least in the judging business.
And,
I would
sorry.
agree. I would agree with the justice, and I would agree that it's not an ethical situation and it's not a moral conviction. It's more that the outcomes go against your policy preferences. And I think Justice Scalia famously said, if a judge is ever issuing opinions that always go the way the judge wants it to go, perhaps it's time to stop being a judge. The rule of law is that important. Our policy preferences have no role in what we do.
I mean, we are not politicians wearing robes. Our job is to look at the law, figure out what it means, and apply it to the facts in the case before us, regardless of whether the outcome is something that we personally like.
And I think the same goes, although, you know, in the executive branch, you have more flexibility in terms of your role as an advocate as opposed to as a judge. But you are, and this goes back to sort of what Jackie was talking about. You're often put in really, really hard situations where you need to make difficult decisions, and you know, echoing what the judges are saying, following the rule of law is sort of the critical piece there. But seeking to divine the right outcome as well. You know, particularly as a prosecutor, with the discretion that you have, that's often a very hard thing. And certainly in my position, I'm confronted with really tough ethical decisions, or not ethical decisions is not the right word, but tough decisions where you need to be comfortable sticking to your guns and following the law to make sure that you're abiding by it.
I think that was a great answer. I think you guys gave some great perspective. So I'm going to put the next question up here on the board, and whoever wants to answer it, please feel free to get us started.
Okay, I can probably take this one, or at least start this conversation. We're doing the work-life balance.
My mouse has a mind of its own. I apologize.
So I think the simple answer is it's hard. It's doable, but it's hard to maintain a healthy work-life balance. It depends on sort of what stage you are in your career. You have to work, I think you should expect to work really hard as a lawyer. And as you become more senior wherever you are, the nature of the work changes. But you know, I have, in my experience as a lawyer, I work a lot. I am a mom of 7-year-old twins, and my husband was a federal prosecutor until really recently, and so we sort of were a DOJ family, and it can be a challenge. I do have to say that you know, I actually try to incorporate my kids as much as possible into what I do, and I've brought them to the office, and they have some sense of the work that I do, and I really try to sort of show them you know, what I do when I go to work every day. And so you can do it. It's possible, but you know, it's definitely a challenge that you're sort of constantly working on, but you have to know what your priorities are and make sure that you're doing your best to achieve those.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to skip ahead here to this last question, just so we can make sure that we can get that one in. So I had that up on the screen. If you guys could really focus, I think that last piece is the most important part of this question, especially as we think about everything going on right now with, you know, where we're at in the world and all the things going on. But if you guys could just touch on that question, but especially that second half.
Say in my experience, technology and the application of law to technology, I think that's pretty critical skill that, you know, we look for on our lawyers. And I think as, you know, I mean, everything goes online, everything is more complex, data sets are more complicated. Just actually understanding tech is going to be extremely important particularly for you guys.
I mean, I think that anything that teaches you to think and act logically is a good prerequisite for going to law school. I knew people who were math majors who did exceptionally well in law school. I know of philosophy majors that did. There is no one right way into the legal field, in my opinion.
To close out, and then we'll come back and give instructions on how to proceed with the networking piece.
One thing I would say that sort of struck me throughout this whole hour presentation, we've talked about a lot of the things that Davidson teaches you that are important as far as the legal profession goes. I'm not sure why. There we go. I'm not, as far as the legal profession goes, one of the things we haven't said is the honor code. The honor code that you have at Davidson, that you swear you will abide by, I think sometimes people think, well, that's just Davidson. That's my 4 years there. You know, Davidson is strict on that, and then life goes on after that. But that's not true. Especially if you're going into the legal profession, I think any profession, but certainly the legal profession, as lawyers, we are held in life to higher standards in everything that we do once we pass the bar. In everything we do, even when it's in a personal capacity, we are held to a higher standard. And I think it's important for Davidson people to appreciate that higher standard is everything that you're experiencing right now with Davidson and the honor code. And I can tell you, as somebody who just went through the most intense security background check that I ever even understood was possible, having that background of the Davidson honor code and what it teaches you about how to comport yourself in life was critical. And it makes sailing through background checks very, very easy. And not everybody can say that, so.
I would say if you make the decision to go to law school, don't feel like you have to decide in your first 6 months in law school or even the end of law school or 2 or 3 years out of law school what you're going to do for your whole career. I mean, you've heard us talk about working in firms and different types of public sector roles, but you don't have to figure out what you want to do right off the bat the first day or what classes you take in law school isn't going to drive what your career is going to be. The biggest recommendation I could give you is just, work as hard as you can and do as good as you can in law school. That will put a lot of opportunities for you when you graduate. But then, more importantly, once you graduate, whatever you start doing, whether it's private practice or you go work in the DA's office or you do go work in a corporate setting, just do the best you can. Always treat people right. Follow what Judge Branch is talking about with the honor code and doing that, treating everybody fairly and ethically once you get into your career. And you never know what doors will open or what type of law that you might end up practicing that you never thought about that you might end up enjoying. And if you do good by people and you do good work for clients and other lawyers at firms and in the public sector, you're going to unexpectedly pop into other opportunities to do things on the road that you may not be contemplating right now. So if you're torn between, well, I might want to go be a prosecutor or I might want to go work in a firm and do corporate work, don't worry about it. If you're sure you want to law school, go ahead and go to law school and then just do the best you can once you get out, and you'll eventually find your way and get to do a lot of neat things.
I would say, and I said this, this is not really a legal recommendation, but ask for advice, ask for guidance from folks that you are students in front of or maybe work for. Ask for their help. I think some of us are pretty lucky to have people that we know who are lawyers who have access, but to things. But you should be really reaching to your professors and anybody just to ask for help, because those connections that you make with the professors, with other folks who are maybe lawyers, those are the ones that are going to open doors from you that you probably wouldn't expect to have opened.
Yeah, and I want to echo what Shreve was saying. I mean, I think the people who tend to be unhappiest in the law are people who just sort of default into it. They think that that's what they're supposed to do, and so that's why they go to law school. And I agree with Shreve. Talk to as many people as possible. Explore your interest. You know, do internships in various areas of law that you think you would be interested in, because you'd be surprised what you like and what you don't like. And really having the experience will help you learn more about yourself and your interests. And so I would just say make law school sort of a very sort of mindful, purposeful decision instead of something that you just don't know what else to do. So I think I'll just go to law school. To me, those are the folks who tend to be a little lost in the profession and they don't have the passion for it. And if this is something that really suits you and you're interested in, it can be incredibly rewarding and varied in what you do throughout your life. And I think that's what's the best part of being a lawyer.
And let me pick up on something that Jackie just said, because it plays into what I was going to say anyway. The thing we tend to lose track of is that the law is a service profession in the ways that, in the same way that medicine can be a service profession, the clergy can be a service profession, counseling can be a service profession. Ultimately, whatever type of law you choose to go into, or even non-legal fields that lawyers can go into. I had a law school classmate who was the commissioner of minor league baseball for a while. He had a great time. Is remember two things. First of all, that your job there is to help somebody. And secondly, understand that as part of helping somebody, you are taking stress on yourself, and be prepared to deal with it. This is not a no stress lifestyle, but it can be, as Jackie said, a very rewarding one, because at the end of the day, you can help somebody through the worst problem they ever had in their life and help them come out the other side of it. And that can really be more meaningful than you can imagine.
I think that's a great way to end our panel. First off, I just want to thank you guys. We hit 8 o'clock in the head, so well done on keeping it right at an hour. I know we could probably do this for 2.5 hours and still have some great information. But we really appreciate you guys. This is the point. Normally we give a round of applause, so we'll give you a virtual round of applause.